Lauren Bradford. I'm Senior Director of Global Partnerships at Candid, and I'm going to hand over now to Benjamin Balaji from Wings, Executive Director, to start us off today. Thanks everybody for joining.
Thank you very much, Lauren. Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. So first, some housekeeping. Please remember this is an interactive event and we would love to hear from you in the second half. So use the Q&A box to post comments or questions and make it clear if you would like to speak about your ideas. We will try to get around to hear from you during the fishbowl section of the event. You can also use the raise hand function, and if the moderator comes to you, please turn on your camera. Use the chat box if you have any technical issue and someone in the team will try to help. Please also remember this event is being recorded. So before we hear from our keynote speaker, I'd like to say a few words about why we've chosen to hold this event now and the significance of this topic of multi-stakeholder partners to achieve the SDGs. As we all know, COVID has exacerbated the global issues we're facing and made even more challenging the achievement of the global goals. The crisis has made even more obvious the urgent need to end inertia, to move away from incrementalism and break down silos, especially those that exist between government, business, and civil society. At Wings, we're a global philanthropy network, and we believe in the potential that the sector has in bringing about transformative social change. And philanthropic efforts of all sizes and forms have surged in response to the crisis until now, from small donations on the one hand and grassroots initiatives, as well as major investments from big foundations. And we've been trying to compile a bit what was happening in the field and put together a global resources hub at Wings. And we've identified over 250 relief funds, recovery funds, calls to actions, pledges, which are there not just to allow flows to be channeled where it's needed, but also actors to reflect on the way they work, they operate, and sometimes evolve the way they do. Candid, I think, has tracked over 12 billion of US dollars across the globe in donations. And interestingly, out of the 4 main countries that have been providing private resources in response to the crisis, 3 of them are emerging economies, China, India, and Brazil. And that wasn't present in most of these places. But yet philanthropy was not fully prepared or fully fit for the future in the face of COVID-19. And that's due to the lack of a strong collective infrastructure for the field, especially in places where this would be the most needed. And actually the sector is facing tightening policy restrictions alongside the broader civil society in many parts of the world. And it lacks representation in response plans in most countries. So for philanthropy to achieve its full potential, it will need to take on more advocacy, we believe, a more constructive voice in development policies, and also a strong commitment to multi-actor collaboration. And these are areas in which foundations and other philanthropic actors have been quite shy to engage in. And actually data shows that at least 60% of foundations do not collaborate. So how do we move from aspiration to collaboration to action? And well, we know the SDGs already as such provide a common language, and that's a great opportunity that we can leverage. But we also need concrete platforms that can foster multi-actor collaboration. And so that's in the spirit that the SDG Philanthropy Platform was created at the inception of the SDGs with the UNDP, Candid, Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors, and now Wings co-leading on the philanthropy side with the UNDP. And the platform has been actually quite key in raising awareness on the SDGs in the sector. And beyond raising awareness, we've seen interesting examples of concrete collaboration on the ground. And I'd like just to mention briefly the Kenya example, where the platform has helped to leverage at least $6 million from a range of multilateral, bilateral, philanthropic, and private sector partners. And that's because there was a true focus on multi-actor collaboration and also a strong government leadership behind the initiative. So despite some successes, overall, philanthropy has been pretty slow in jumping on the SDG train. while the business and NGO sectors seem at least more involved and aligned with the framework. But I think that's because for too long, the question has been around aligning frameworks and indicators. I think that we need a pragmatic leap into more concrete and generalized multi-actor collaboration. So the SDG Philanthropy Platform and WINGS can be leveraged to accelerate this. As WINGS members, who are themselves networks, support organizations, and funders that are championing the field on the ground, these members, these organizations that are already there, they can be leveraged to foster such collaborations on the ground. If we give them the right tools to do so. And they can also engage their constituencies, not just in being aware of the SDGs, but actually engaging in discussion, coordination, collaboration with other actors. And so 5 years after the Addis Ababa conference on financing for development and 10 years before 2030, we really have an imperative to learn from concrete experiences that have already been implemented on the ground, and to have honest discussions that will lead to a strong set of recommendations for policymakers and of course for philanthropic actors themselves. So we're very pleased to partner with the Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation to turn the diverse insights that we'll receive today and our honest discussions into inputs for policy recommendations. And we're thankful to the UNDP for co-leading the platform and offering this powerful collaboration opportunity. So we both hope to leverage that in order to foster that such concrete collaborations on the ground and offer a voice to philanthropy in the global socioeconomic response plans. So today we'll hear from a panel of expert speakers representing philanthropy, civil society, business, and policy on what they think are the most crucial levers and barriers to the success of multi-sector partnerships to achieve the SDGs. So there will then be a chance for all of you to take part in the conversation, and we would love to hear from you and from your learning on this topic and your experiences also in these partnerships. But first, I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker, Ulrich. Ulrich is the UNDP's Assistant Administrator and Director of the Bureau of External Relations and Advocacy. She leads the organization in nurturing and growing key relationship with member states and new and emerging partners, as well as leading UNDP's communications and advocacy as it works to realize the vision of the Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you very much, and Ulrika, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Benjamin, and thank you, SDG Philanthropy Platform partners WINGS, and also the Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation, among others. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. We very much need it 5 years after member states and world leaders took the important decision to lay out a roadmap for a sustainable future. And I think, as you said, Benjamin, a lot has been done, and we should recall the goal 17 these days, which is actually about partnerships, but also given the unprecedented times that we find ourselves in and the quite troubled world, we need to bring even more out of this and have this effective partnership that you've mentioned. UNDP, we measure what we call human development, and we have done that since 1990. And in our latest report, the Human Development Report, I'm happy to share perhaps a link also in the chat later on, we can actually say that for the first time since we started measurement, we are going in reverse. In Sub-Saharan Africa, we will most likely see a decline of what we call human development, the broad measurement, when we're looking at education, health, and human well-being. That could take us 10 years back in time. But we know that across the world, countries are really struggling to handle the pandemic and the wider effects of the pandemic. So I'll just give you a bit of the background of UNDP's work and what we have seen would actually play out in the situation that we're in. Because as we know, the pandemic affects everyone, everywhere, but it does not affect everyone equally. It really exacerbates the pre-existing inequalities and vulnerabilities that we have seen in our Human Development Report. And the socioeconomic assessments that you referred to, Benjamin, they are done in more than 70 countries now, and we have 5 regional reports. You all find them on our website. They have shown that while countries are at different stages of the pandemic, they are already, as we know, dealing with enormous social and economic impacts, including then rising poverty and inequality. The poorest are the least, as we know, capable of dealing with the effects of the pandemic. And we know by now that at least 100 million people are at risk of being pushed into extreme poverty, adding to the already 700 million people in poverty. And of course, women are unequally also affected by this. We're talking about effects that will trigger 60% of declining earnings for informal workers. And then we know that more than 60% of the global workforce are already in the informal market. These are figures from ILO. And then of course, women once again being disproportionately hit by this fact. Food insecurity, 265 million people facing acute food insecurity this year as a result of the pandemic. And then, as we also put forward in our human development report that we issued already in December last year, where we actually have seen a lot of good examples where countries, people, communities can leapfrog using the digital access. We also know that the digital world is really unequal, and we foresee that if we don't make the right investments in the digital field, we will also see it driving increasing inequalities across the world. So if we just look at us now, we are connected, but in sub-Saharan Africa, once again, 9 out of 10 children are of course not connected when schools are closed, as compared to very few in the global north. But there are also, and we are fully aware of this, I think in the cities where we live, increasing inequalities and lack of access to education also in our big cities in the global north, if we look at the access of school kids in the suburbs and so on. We know that the world will get through the crisis as we have come through the crisis before, but we really need to think through what we see playing out now. When we did the follow-up of the Sustainable Development Goals already ahead of last year's General Assembly, we could see some of the problems that we see now being exacerbated because of the crisis, and we need to address them properly, and we need to do that in partnerships. I'll come to that. We call from the United Nations, of course, for an extraordinary scale-up of international support and political commitment, and for multilateral solutions to these global challenges that we face. The pandemic is such an obvious case for this. But also, as we look at the framework for the immediate socioeconomic response, we need to see how we can learn from each other and how we can work in partnership with the private sector, but also with the philanthropy. And the framework actually guides the actions of the UN system for the coming 12 to 8 months. We work very closely with governments, but also with a number of important actors among the international financial institutions. The technical lead is being done by UNDP, and we use then the role we have been given by member states, the so-called SDG integrator role, and that is about finding integrated solutions to these complex challenges. We really want to support countries to prepare and respond and recover, but also to take us beyond recovery towards 2030 and the goals we have set up. And we have identified 4 main areas of work right now within the UN system, but also with a broad range of partners, addressing governance, social protection, the green recovery, as you've heard a lot about, but also then the importance of the digital disruption. And we would be very keen also to share these assessments and plans with you so we can see how we can partner around them, because they are really based on solid country assessments, but also then looking at recovery, as I said, beyond the immediate 12 to 18 months towards 2030. The philanthropic response, as you also refer to, has shown the sector, we believe, at its best, Benjamin, even though there are, of course, many more things to be done. At present, when we were looking at the figures, we can speak about a record-breaking of 11.9 billion in US dollars in funding that has been given in response to the pandemic. And the outpouring of the philanthropy's funding for COVID-19 in the first 6 months of 2020 has actually far surpassed any other disaster funding when we look at the figures. And in this respect, the funding amounted to more than 16 times of the funding that was pledged for the hurricanes Harvey, Irma, Maria, and Dorian, as well as the Australian bushfires combined. And what is striking is not only the scale of capital being committed by the major philanthropists, but also how it's being given at a record speed, with fewer conditions, and in greater collaboration with others. And I think that this is also what we need to discuss, and that you alluded to in the beginning, Benjamin, that we need to make the money work even better in coordination. Just a few examples. The Jack Ma Foundation, the United Nations Advocate for Sustainable Development Goals, has donated protective masks and test kits around the world. Gates Foundation, of course, Wellcome, Mastercard Foundation partnered to contribute up to 125 million in seed funding to speed up the response. And Ford Foundation has, and this is interesting, an interesting example I think we should look closer into, the first social bond ever by a foundation on the United States taxable corporate bond market to ensure non-profits can carry their important work to serve the world's most vulnerable communities. And the proceeds of the bond will enable Ford Foundation to almost double its grant making from approximately 550 million per year to more than 1 billion. Ford Foundation will focus its support on funding under-resourced areas in the US and around the world, and stabilizing and strengthening organizations that they believe will really lead us through the recovery and really towards a more just, sustainable and equitable world. We now have the opportunity, as we have said before, and it has also become the campaign world of regional organizations and countries, to build back better. Nowadays we say in the UN that we shouldn't really go back, we should move forward towards a more green, fair and resilient recovery that shouldn't leave anyone behind. But as we have said, multi-stakeholder partnerships among governments, financial institutions, the private sector and the philanthropy is not only critical, we will not be able to make this if we don't work together. ODA, it should be said, our official development assistance aid, as it's called, is still in many developing countries a really important source of funding. Remittances are dropping, foreign direct investments are dropping, and we are really concerned if ODA also will drop in these times. So your support also to safeguard ODA with the possibilities that we have also to use ODA for catalytic impact is incredibly important. So wherever you are, speak out also to governments that are thinking about downscaling ODA in these times. ODA, even though continuously a smaller proportion of development finance, incredibly important and needed as a platform. The Global Partnership for Development, Effective Development Cooperation that we work with in this partnership as the primary multi-stakeholder vehicle for driving effectiveness efforts is very important also to this conversation. And UNDP is of course proud to partner with this GPEDC, the Global Partnership, to see to how we together with Wings and you in the philanthropy can showcase that we come together in ways of making money work even more effective. UNDP has launched, and I'm also happy to share with you in the chat function a link so you can find it easily. Last week, something that we call a private sector global COVID-19 facility. It's the first of its kind joint initiative that we hope can harness the large networks of its 3 initiating partners, UNDP, ICC and UNGC. And we aim to bring together both private and public actors at the global and national level to co-create solutions tailored to the phases of the pandemic. But as I said, taking us then into the implementation, the decade of action that we had promised that we would embark on this year. And we also, for you to know, develop, I think the UN is really rich on data and we need to make the most out of it. We also develop country level data and insights about SDG enabling investment opportunities through a project that we call SDG Impact. And these investor maps are also an asset to you in this network, but also to a number of countries where we're developing them right now as we speak: Colombia, South Africa, Nigeria, China, and Jordan. Laying out also the possibilities that are there for investments. Philanthropy's role, I've said a number of times, can't be underestimated. You are well positioned, you're a strategic partner, and you have both financial resource, but you also have, and I spoke to this last year, and I think that this is important also, knowledge and excellent networks that can contribute to the scale up of our development efforts, as we mentioned. And we collaborate with Wings, but we also then see to that we can really make the best use of our national connections, the close connections to government, but also the broad range of actors that we're working with increasingly on the private sector side on the ground. And just to take one example, we mentioned also Kenya initially. The philanthropy platform, as you mentioned, Benjamin, has institutionalized a strong multi-stakeholder governance and coordination structure to convene and connect partners that can catalyze initiatives. And I think we should also see to that all of us in this call and beyond can have a closer look at this initiative and how it has spearheaded also new ways of working, making use of our SDG accelerator labs to harness big data, technology and innovation, but also the National Advisory Board for Impact Investment to unlock SDG financing in Kenya. And as demonstrated in this case, there is a high potential for philanthropy to leverage both public and private funds to act as the strategic driver for innovative finance that we would really like to see. And well, in conclusion, philanthropy has a big potential of scaling development solutions, not only because of the funding, but because of the partnerships that you're increasingly looking for and the ideas that we can bring forward together. And we need to see how we have used technology in different ways to fast track some of the ideas that we've had in this partnership. And while participating in this digital event, I encourage all of us to identify potential ways forward for ideas to become actionable and really make use of this platform to share these best practices and to develop best practices and continuously share them widely. So with no further ado, I'll hand over to the coming speakers and looking forward also to be part of the interesting discussion of ideas and ways forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ulrika, for this impressive picture of the situation and the opportunities. I think the challenges you highlighted are quite daunting, but with also hopeful notes on how we can make the best of our abilities and not just funds, but also expertise and connections to get there. So thank you again for this keynote speech, and I'll leave now the floor to our moderator and facilitator for today's panel and discussion, Lauren Bradford, who is the Senior Director of Global Partnerships at Candid. And so Lauren will introduce the panel, and we look forward to the conversation with all of you. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Benjamin, and thank you, Ulrika, for starting us off for the day. You've left us with a lot, I think, to consider, think about, reflect upon, and act upon. And the digital piece is really interesting because here we are in 2020 at a UN General Assembly that is all online. So we really have taken digital to the next level, perhaps when we didn't even realize we could do it in this way. So well done to everyone for taking on board this new way of working. So I'd like to introduce our speakers for the day, and then just to share a little bit about how we're going to go through the morning. So first of all, we have Peter Lohan, President and CEO of the Conrad and Hilton Foundation, George Moreira da Silva, Director of the Development Cooperation Directorate at the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, Nana Afarinzinu, Executive Director at the West Africa Civil Society Institute, some of you may know as WACSI, Angel Font, the Corporate Director of Research and Strategy at La Caixa Foundation in Spain, and the Chair of the European Foundation Center, just recently appointed, so congratulations. Oksana Oresheva, CEO of the Vladimir Potanin Foundation, and Yanti Triwadiantini, Chair of the ASEAN CSR Network and Board Member at Indonesia Business Links. So we're really privileged to have these speakers with us today, who are representing a diverse set of backgrounds from the business sector, private sector, philanthropy, civil society, government, multilateral stakeholders. So without further ado, I just want to share the way we're going to work today. We're going to have the panelists each share very short, quick, snappy remarks in a sort of TED Talk approach. And then we're going to shift to what we traditionally refer to as a fishbowl style event. Obviously, that's a little bit different online, but the idea is to encourage all of you as participants to also partake in an open dialogue. So we won't get so much into a Q&A between panelists and participants, but we'll encourage all participants to provide commentary, to ask questions to each other and to the panelists, and everybody will be encouraged to respond. In order to participate, please raise your hand through the Zoom technology, or you can write a question or a comment in the chat, and that will be fielded to me by our colleagues. So with that, I'd first of all like to introduce you to Peter Lohan, who serves as the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Conrad N. Hilton Foundation. Peter is a passionate leader with 25 years of foundation and nonprofit experience internationally, with a focus on improving the well-being of vulnerable children. Hilton Foundation recently published their report on multi-stakeholder partnerships and achieving the SDGs, which I encourage you all to read, and that I think Peter will touch on a little bit today. So Peter, can you please share your thoughts in response to our key question for the day, which all speakers will be answering, which is, what are the key levers and barriers to successful multi-stakeholder partnerships that will work towards achieving the SDGs? And it would be great if you can share a little bit about this report that I've just mentioned and how philanthropy can make the best use of it. And perhaps any thoughts you have on the idea of perhaps a key convener or institutional home for multi-stakeholder partnerships as well, as to how we can move things forward. So thank you, Peter. We're looking forward to hearing from you.
Thanks, Lauren. I'll do all that in 4 minutes.
No small task.
Conversation. And I believe the Dahlberg report that I will refer to will be placed in the chat for people to pick up. And I'd like to thank Ulrich as well. We're honored at the Hilton Foundation to have UNDP as a partner, and we see UNDP as having a critical role in multi-stakeholder partnerships globally. At Hilton, we believe that MSPs, multi-stakeholder partnerships, are key to long-term success. They are partnering differently that puts a better future for all in reach. And I don't mean a general gauzy better future, but I mean what we committed to in the Sustainable Development Goals, in the Paris Accords, layered over by what we have learned in COVID this year. MSPs can work harder with philanthropy as the facilitator, government as the builder, private sector as the accelerator, and civil society as the expert. And there is a danger of not doing this. There's a danger of a single sector working alone, and particularly for philanthropy, which has a tendency to be isolated and insular. So it's not just about foundation on foundation collaboration, but it's working with the range of actors you'll hear about today. We hope that it will lead to better implementation and financing planning. And we feel that we should approach the SDGs and the Paris Accords not as frameworks for positive aspirations, but it's as something at which we are not allowing ourselves to fail or to underperform. And in order to get there, we have to do much better than we're doing today. Had COVID not happened this year, we would still be having this session. We still needed greater work on the SDGs and on Paris. COVID has simply exposed vulnerabilities and added layers we need to pay attention to. No one sector can deal with all of the issues that we have in front of us right now. And we would say at Hilton that current philanthropic partnerships models aren't working hard enough or smart enough to overcome the gap. Now, we went to Dahlberg, who many of you will know as a consulting firm and a think tank working on global development issues. And they prepared the report for us that has just gone up in the chat, and said basically that each actor of government, business, civil society, philanthropy has a superpower. Government is the builder, it coordinates, it sets standards and rules, it does a lot of the financing. Business is an accelerator. It innovates, it brings pace and rigor and hopefully consumer responsiveness, and also brings financing. Civil society is the expert. I know that's not the way this is usually framed, but we believe that civil society is the assembly of citizens, the people with lived experience, the people that all this work is trying to benefit. And civil society allows citizens to organize, to advocate, to watchdog, and to extend services to the most marginalized. Philanthropy, and I would say UNDP and a lot of UN organizations as well, can play a role of facilitator. It convenes, it keeps an eye on the long term, it negotiates and orchestrates, it provides angel funding, especially to the backbone organizations that keep MSPs running over the long haul. And we're talking about a 10-year haul until 2030, and certainly beyond. Each of these actors also has weaknesses. Government can be slow and unresponsive. Business can be driven by shareholder profit rather than social progress. Civil society can be diffuse and unorganized, and philanthropy, again, can be insular and isolated, or as Benjamin said, slow to jump on trains. We need to think that multi-stakeholder partnerships not only amplify our strengths, but it allows others to compensate for our weaknesses. And we'll talk a little bit about that in the fishbowl, et cetera. And remember that most of these actors are also multi-level. Government has a national level, a regional level, and a very local level. You've seen in the example of COVID in the United States that the government has a coordinating and inspiring role. The states and the counties have a delivery role, and the local has essentially a behavioral role. And these are they all need to work together for effective progress. We could talk today, again, as Benjamin said, and as Ulrich said, about the Kenya SDG Philanthropy Platform, and other examples that participants will know about that give you an idea concretely what this means. 4 quick other points from there's a need to share power and responsibility at all levels, not just the grass tops, but also the grassroots. There's a need to radically expand networks in order to get this work done. There's a need to make every dollar or rupiah or cedi count, and that includes implementation planning and financing. For philanthropy, I mean, it means strategic seed funding and long-term keeping the lights on responsibilities. And fourth, we need to move from transparency to accountability. We need to act as though we were going to be judged if the world does not deliver on the SDGs as they are written. Not that it would be, simply a unfortunate thing. And we need to make plans that are consequential with that acting. So finally, we need to reimagine partnerships to work more efficiently and to lead in collaboration with the people most affected. And that way we'll see more traction. Philanthropy should move from thinking about a response only as a sector and only in the areas that our particular foundation may be interested in, and be more aware of our contributions and assets in wide partnerships that will have much more leverage. If we expand our view of who does what, we can solve problems more effectively. Thanks.
Thank you, Peter. That was fantastic, and you got it all in great time. And I think it's a really helpful framework for us to think about the strengths of each of these actors. We often talk about the actors as a collective, but I'm not sure that we focus in, like you say, on their superpowers and also their weaknesses and call them out so specifically. So thank you for that. And also an acknowledgement that I think civil society is well overdue in hearing that they're the experts. So pleased to hear that as well. I think that will mean a lot to our civil society colleagues on the call. So with that, we're going to go to George next. And of course, Peter, if you have more comments, points to make later, then we'll circle back in the fishbowl and you'll be able to do that. So George Moreira da Silva is the Director of the Development Cooperation Directorate at the OECD. From 2013 to 2015, he was Portugal's Minister of Environment, Energy and Spatial Planning. As Director of DCD, Mr. Moreira da Silva plays a key role in positioning the OECD's work on development cooperation at the leading edge. So George, can you tell us, obviously, your response to the question, again, of what are the key levers and barriers to successful multi-stakeholder partnerships that will work towards achieving the SDGs? And it would be great to hear from you in terms of a policy perspective, obviously, including the effectiveness principles, and perhaps any lessons that the Development Assistance Committee, the DAC members, are learning along the way as they participate in multi-stakeholder partnerships. So please, George, take us away.
Thank you, Lauren. I think that my job is now much easier after Ulrich's and Peter's presentation, because I agree with Peter with the fact that we would need to have this conversation even before COVID. Now, with this crisis, it's even more fundamental, because we are dealing with a crisis that, as Ulrich said, is exacerbating the risks of developing countries and the poorest. We have launched at OECD last week the States of Fragility report, showing that fragility is being exacerbated by this crisis. We knew already that 80% of the poorest will live in fragile context by 2030. Now we are already seeing some signals that shows that in the immediate future, these risks will be more tangible. We also launched a report recently showing that we will face a 700 billion drop of external finance to developing countries this year, mainly due to the drop on foreign direct investment, but also on remittances, which shows, as Ulrich mentioned, that the role of ODA will be fundamental. So we need to protect ODA, we need to deal with the debt alleviation discussions, and we need to foster additional resources from the private sector. That's why the role of philanthropy, if it was already fundamental before the crisis, now it's vital. We know that philanthropy has played a vital role, not just mobilizing additional resources, but also bringing some creativity, some flexibility, some agility, some risk-taking approach that was very eloquent in some sectors, and this capacity to innovate was fundamental to further enhance the development effectiveness agenda. But we know that now we also need to use the data that is already available to further enhance and to improve this approach. We know that philanthropy has played this role, but at the same time, we know that only 70% of CSOs funded by foundations reporting to the OECD are based in partner countries, and the bulk of finance going to international and donor are going to international and donor country owned based CSOs. So we see here a potential for improvement. The same on gender. Only 5% of all support from philanthropy is taking gender as a principal objective, and 16% of flows of foundations reporting to us are focused on gender equality. So you can see that even for the philanthropy that is taking the lead in a very innovative approach, there is margin of maneuver for improvement, and I would say getting more data would be important. I would like to thank all foundations that are reporting to the OECD in a granular manner on their databases. This is encouraging because it will help us identify redundancies and also facing some transaction costs. Let me now raise another issue. So beyond finance and focusing on effectiveness. If on the financing agenda, financing for sustainable development, this crisis is putting an additional lens on the role of philanthropy, I would say the same on effectiveness. All the principles from Busan, the country ownership, the focus on results, the inclusive partnerships, the transparency and mutual accountability are now even more important in a context where financial resources will be more scarce, or the competition for these resources will take another level. So I would say that the engagement and exchange of experiences between donors and philanthropy within the effectiveness agenda is vital. I think that we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We have the Global Partnership on Effective Development Cooperation, whose UNDP and the OECD plays the secretariat role. We are very happy with the role from Wings. So I would say that it's important that we use this effectiveness platform to further enhance this agenda. And I would say from the DAC, what I'm learning from the DAC members, the donors, is that they are willing to partner more as donors, bilateral donors, but also multilateral donors with philanthropy in ways that rather than duplicating or competing, would get the catalytic role. So I'll stop here to make sure that I will more or less fulfill the 4 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh. That's very helpful. And I know that I've put you in a tough position, all of you, by giving you the 4 minutes, but there will be more time to actually dig in. So this is a great start, I think. And, you know, it's interesting but not surprising to hear about the drop in foreign direct investment and remittances, I think, and that is obviously something that we will all have to work towards given the large amount of money that flows through these vehicles. And I think protecting ODA, obviously that's come up twice now through Ulrich and yourself. So hopefully we can unpack that a little bit more in the fishbowl for some of our participants, because I think there'll be a sort of varied level of knowledge on that topic. So thank you. So with that, I'd like to introduce Nana Afadzenu. Nana is currently Executive Director of the West Africa Civil Society Institute, and she has worked with and within the civil society sector for the past 21 years. She's a passionate advocate for sustainable development in Africa with the full participation of an effective, efficient, influential, and sustainable civil society. So Nana, we'd love to hear your views again on the question of what are the key levers and barriers to successful multi-stakeholder partnerships that will help us achieve the SDGs. And it would be great if you could speak a little bit to the work that's being done in Ghana to engage citizens. And I actually see we already have a question sort of to the citizen engagement piece in the chat. So this is very timely.
Great.
And yes, tell us a little bit about how civil society is working in Ghana to achieve the SDGs.
Thank you, Lauren, and thank you for the invitation to be part of this discussion. I think it has already been stated what kind of value civil society brings to the table, so I'm not going to beat that horse. But clearly, the multi-stakeholder partnership on SDGs and the Ghana case study is one that I want to talk about because of the success that it has chalked so far. And I think that we could learn a few things from that. One, of course, is that talking about the levers. Civil society learned fast from what it had done under the MDGs, that there was a need to be better organized. And so there's now a well-organized civil society platform that is one credible entry point that other stakeholders, other partners can engage with. And I think that is very important. There was also political will to support multi-stakeholder partnerships right from the beginning. And therefore, this, you know, you could see in the kind of structures that were set up to facilitate this. And civil society was therefore working, they were observers to the high-level management committee. The coordinating structure in charge of the implementation has civil society partnership. The technical committee, which is broader and encompasses all related and relevant ministries and agencies, has several seats for civil society. That creation of the structures to facilitate that multi-stakeholder partnership was critical and has helped. The practical workings of the committee, pooling resources, so government, private sector, civil society, pooling resources to work on different areas of the SDGs, having joint projects. An example is the voluntary national review reports that was prepared for Ghana. Government and civil society worked together. The government report was prepared. Civil society also prepared their shadow reports. And at the UN, even in the presentation, government actually ceded some of its time and space for civil society to present its shadow report. So there is some kind of work and collaboration going on. The fact that government can now engage civil society when they need credible sources of reference or resources on the different thematic areas, they know where to go when it comes to working with citizens, with civil society, and vice versa. And so you have different civil society organizations that when they are having programs, they know that they can engage government and they can have government representation there. And another good collaborator that we often don't mention is the media. And they have been very much a part of the process here in Ghana. And importantly, one of the things that I think can be taken from the work that is going on in Ghana is what they are doing to cascade the multi-stakeholder partnerships to the sub-national level, so that you are not only looking at this at the national level, but even at the district level, even much closer to the people, you are having this kind of multi-stakeholder engagement. So that is one of the things that I think is interesting to learn. And of course, learnings from civil society that other partners have taken on board within the multi-stakeholder partnership, like an online platform for information sharing, actually developed by CSOs, handed over to governments to facilitate easy access to information. So those are some of the things that I think are good to talk about. Yes, we do have the SDG Philanthropy Platform, which could play an interlocutory role, but I think that there's a lot more that could be done by that platform, particularly in engaging this already working system of multi-stakeholder partnerships. So that is one of the areas. There are also some barriers, mainly political. One, leadership changes because you have government kind of spearheading the work around this, where there are leadership changes at the political level in critical government agencies. It has affected the work of that they are done. Sometimes this brings about some tough struggles and wars where you have multiple control points, whether it's looking at government, even within civil society, where you have different stakeholders. So there's kind of some unhealthy competition, and it does affect resourcing. And so there have been times when in the Ghana example, they have spoken about inadequate resources for the particular committee that is doing the work that has to be done. So those are some of the challenges. And then again, because you are looking at multi-stakeholder partnerships, the challenge of speaking, you know, in the different groups or the different holds, having a collective voice. So within civil society, having a collective voice, having private sector, having government, and having a challenge sometimes where there's some kind of what somebody has called the bane of egos, logos, and silos, where people want to be seen, organizations want to be seen, and therefore not working in the interest of the collective. Those are some of the challenges. There are also one of the things that I think is critical, and particularly as we are talking about philanthropy in the philanthropic sector. I believe we do have a weak local philanthropic base. A lot of the support that has come to support the work of civil society partners working in this multi-sectoral partnership has come from external philanthropy. And that is a question I will throw to all of us, actually. When we talk about philanthropy, and we are talking about the philanthropic sector, a lot of the time we are thinking of the Western philanthropy that is coming from the global north to the global south. And I think that we need to look at how to build that kind of global south philanthropic base and invest in building that base, so that if we are talking about sustainable development goals, we will be looking at sustainability if the people are supporting their own development. And I think that is one of the challenges that we have, because even these multi-sectoral platforms that we work with mainly depend on external philanthropy. What is happening to the local philanthropic base? How are we prioritizing it? How is private sector supporting that? And how are we building the infrastructure, the data that is needed, the systems, the institutions that are needed to support local philanthropy that supports the SDGs? So those are some of the other aspects. And then one thing that I think needs to be mentioned is that with COVID, beautiful multi-sectoral partnership happening on the SDGs. With COVID, that all fell apart, and you didn't really see kind of partnership, government working with private sector, working with civil society to kind of respond, you know, as partners to what was happening. And with philanthropy. So they were working in silos. Now, so when we have a crisis, how do we then respond? particularly if we are looking at multi-sectoral, multi-stakeholder partnerships. And I think that is one of the areas that has proven to be some kind of a challenge. Let me stop here. I think I've already gone over my 4 minutes, but these are some of the things if we want to talk about the success, the levers for success, and some of the barriers to success. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I think you've touched on a lot of very important points, and I can see in the chat there's a lot of activity and a lot of people agreeing with you. And just sort of 2 points that I will hone on in a little bit before going to the next speaker is, one, I think you make a very important point about the need for the South-South cooperation and the development of local philanthropy, and how philanthropy infrastructure can play a really strong support role there as well, and other membership organizations and organizations such as Wings. And then the other point I just wanted to sort of build on as well is you touched on the challenges of the political barriers. And I've noticed that coming up more and more in research recently, and including in a survey that we actually put out before this event to gauge people's thoughts on the barriers to multi-stakeholder partnerships. And in fact, of the 67 responses, the political and social context was the #1 issue that was seen as hindering successful multi-stakeholder partnerships. So I think that's probably a general feeling across all of our participants joining us today. So thank you for that, Nana. That was very helpful, and we'll come back and start to talk about a little bit more of around those topics shortly. So next, I would like to introduce Oksana Oresheva. Oksana has been the General Director of the Vladimir Potanin Foundation since 2014. Prior to joining the foundation, Oksana served as Russia Program Director of the Ford Foundation International Fellowship Program at the Moscow office of the Institute of International Education from 2000 to 2010. Oksana was Chair of the Governing Council of the Russian Donors Forum in 2015 and 2016. So Oksana, again, if you could answer the question about the key levers and barriers to successful multi-stakeholder partnerships, that would be great. And it'll be, I think you believe that the SDGs can really provide a common language for us all. So if you can touch on that and how we can leverage this common language, that might be really useful to participants as well. But I will leave it to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren, and thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts at this seminar. I would like to start that all of the SDGs, directly or indirectly, are related to the daily work on philanthropy. This is kind of a starting point for us, and doesn't matter whether the concept of SDGs is reflected in the daily work in philanthropy. It's still there because the core values are quite similar. We all are working towards the better future, to better, just, and sustainable world. However, there are still some barriers why when we're working to the common future and just future, we see the situation from different perspectives. And I'll try to concentrate on 3 points briefly and try to name them in a way. Saying lost in translation, being local, and beyond stereotypes. What does I mean by lost in translation? If SDGs and philanthropy and the NGO sector, civil society as a whole, are really working on the common goals, share the common values, why we still use different language to explain that? And what we can see, at least one of the explanations, is that philanthropy has a very long history. We have centuries of philanthropy today. And we assume that what we are doing to improve the world doesn't need to be explained further. SDGs is a relatively new concept in comparison with philanthropy, and even raising with the same issues as philanthropy is working on, we sometimes use different language. And we really need to translate, in a way, the language of SDGs into the philanthropic language and vice versa. So certain barriers could be taken away if we really see this commonality between 2 areas. Being local. again, if you will look at the root of philanthropy, the most action is going on at the local level. We already talked about civil society and community level, and this is where the real change is seen and achieved. And when it comes to the bigger issues and goals like SDGs, it's very easy to lose the line between global areas and real local work we are doing on the ground. And this requires, I think, two steps. Again, coming back to the language to see how global and local are interconnected. And even when we use different words, we are talking about the same thing. And not to forget about local community level when we set up global goals, like similar to SDGs. The third is about stereotypes. We talk a lot about partnerships, and partnership is actually a specific goal among 17 goals of SDGs. But the question would be, what do we know about partnerships, how we define partnerships, and what kind of partnerships we are looking for? And I think there are several, we take for granted that the partnership is a good thing, but we never explained why it is a good thing. How we, for example, could shift the power through the partnership when we combined resources, financial resources that philanthropy could provide with knowledge and expertise that the communities have. But it's a different type of partnership. Or when we look at each other, not as a way to get additional financial resources, and talking about the financial aid, we can see that philanthropy with all its money could not solve the SDGs problems, really. I mean, it's not up to the philanthropy to do that, even if we use all the assets we have, like trillions of dollars. But what is something beyond the money the philanthropy could bring into this partnership to work on SDGs? And then maybe other things would come up, something like innovation, which is difficult to do on the global scale from the beginning, and philanthropy could support innovation that could be scaled up later on. Experiment and risk, when we don't know how things will work in the end, or even some courage to do things never has been doing before. And I think this input of philanthropy is equally important in partnership as financial resources the philanthropic institutions have. And if we add this into the, on the top of the shifting the power between those who have money and those who work on the ground, seeing equal value of each part of this partnership, we can go actually on a different level. So having common language with the government at the national and international level, understanding each other in a better way, working together with corporate philanthropy, not only private philanthropy, to gain additional resources, and not forgetting about the community philanthropy in a different way, not only as a NGOs working on the ground, but the way to support the causes. This is actually when people vote for the cause, providing money for the community. And this is completely different, really different way of partnerships between people. And this, I would go, that's why I call it going beyond traditional stereotypes, when all of us, and that's no matter where we work, combine resources working for the same goals. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Oksana. There's a lot there. I really like those three terms. They're lost in translation, going beyond global and beyond traditional stereotypes. They like really stick in the mind, I think. And thank you for raising community philanthropy and its role. And also, you know, it is a different form of philanthropy to more institutional philanthropy and foundations that many of us know and are used to working with. And I think you've identified some nice sort of differences there as well, of in which the two forms can be leveraged in different ways. And a really great point to be courageous beyond just the dollars. So thank you. So with that, I'm going to go to our next speaker, Yanti Troadiantini. Yanti is the chair of the ASEAN CSR Network. She also sits on the board of management of Indonesian Business Links, a nonprofit organization, one that advocates good corporate citizenship in Indonesia. So Yanti, finally, can you please share with us your thoughts on the levers and barriers to successful multi-stakeholder partnerships, and perhaps what you've seen change in 2020 as a result of the pandemic that has, enabled to create a shift in perhaps the perception of the business sector going from more inward-looking bottom line to perhaps one that's more outward-looking, collective, community-based, and how that might help us think about multi-stakeholder partnerships and achieving the SDGs. So, Yanti. Do we still have Yanti here? Yanti may have dropped off. I'm just checking if she's still here or not. Here she is.
Yes.
Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
All right, so good morning, my friends in United States, and perhaps for others who are located in Asian or ASEAN countries, good evening. Because I'm based in Jakarta, and if the internet connection somehow rather unstable, so please excuse me to actually put my video off later on. So I think from all of the panel speakers, I can hear about the importance of multi-sectors coming together to work on the SDGs. Globally and locally, people have been working under the spirit of partnership, but in fact, many partnership initiatives do not work as easy as expected. Because I just would like to see that we focus on what actually the challenges that we are facing in the different parts of the world. And particularly, I will be representing the situation in my region. People tend to rely on intuition when we do partnership, and then neglecting the concept, principle, and techniques on how to manage partnership effectively. Moreover, what is spelled out as collaborative relationship, in fact, is a transactional relationship, which is a top-down attitude relationship. From what I gather from various experiences of partnership builders, including myself, successful multi-stakeholder partnerships can only be achieved if the key elements are fulfilled, and what they are. There should be co-creation of ideas. So there is no silo ideas or just ideas raised by one parties. It has to be co-created. There should be willingness to co-share mutual benefits and commitment to bear the risk together when things failed. In many cases, we see that the co-risk taking is often missing, as the partners tend to look for gaining benefits only. In particular, I have seen that challenges we experience in building multi-sector partnerships include, for example, the diversity of the system and ways of operating in various sectors, government, private sectors, NGO, donor agencies, they are all different. So therefore, there are incompatibility in terms of working together in many cases. The second one is the imbalance power between partners. There are those that are more dominating than others, and that can be a very challenging for those that are not in the sort of like power seat among the partners. The third one that I also observe is that mistrust due to lack of transparency. So if you see that accountability really matters for everybody, everywhere around the world, there is intransparency, the trust will go. The next one that being engaged or their in terms of the diseases they. But
Yanti,
also,
you're cutting in and out a little bit, so feel free to turn your video off if that would help. We just give Yanti a moment to see if she can reconnect or not.
I'll put up a link on the Human Development Report with regard to access to internet, so you can have a look at that.
Excellent, thank you, Ulrika. That will be a good read for all of us. Okay, we just give Yanti a moment. And maybe I'll share out one other survey finding while we wait for Yanti to return, to see if she can return, which is what we asked another question about: which condition do you think is the most significant in helping successful multi-stakeholder partnerships for the SDGs? And the highest response, positive response to success there was actually multi-level dialogue. So it just reinforces how important these types of conversations are, I think, at this higher level, and also at you know, a smaller group level in terms of negotiating, sharing ideas, best practices, etc. So it reinforces why we're all here today and why such conversations are so important. I'm not seeing Yanti yet, so Ulrika, I'm wondering if you, given we're lucky enough to still have you here, you haven't had to run off to your next General Assembly session, if there are any remarks that you would like to share thus far based on the reflection, you know, reflecting on what has been shared with us to date. And if Yanti returns, then obviously we'll make space for her as well. Would that be okay?
Yeah, sure. No, and I was also saying, as I saw also a good question in the chat, that while we do celebrate that we come together and see the potential, that we have a number of interesting examples that we've been alluding to, I do think that we are all painfully aware that we need to be even stronger and better and work even faster to take us into the right direction and not the wrong direction, as we are actually moving backwards in relation to the implementation of the SDGs in a number of areas right now. And I think the way to do this also is that we need also in this kind of platform to recognize the importance of government budget planning processes. I was also referring to the integration national frameworks that we are working with as the UN, but also with the EU and an increasing number of countries to lay out the right conditions, but also then of course policy advice to governments with regard to legislation to lay the ground for this. And some of you have mentioned also the barriers, and I was also happy, and I think I should have mentioned it even more also, to hear the discussion about local philanthropies, because of course also UNDP can be together with others, but we're happy to provide also a national platform in so many countries with our presence in 170 countries and territories to also see if we can be of support with regard to legislation and to bring forward the strength of all the philanthropies that we see increasingly in South-South cooperations. I think there's a lot of potential there that we should also zoom into, that was mentioned. But as I said, I mean, legislation and government budgets, they really need to give the right conditions, and that kind of more systematic change need to happen for also the private sector and philanthropies to be able to leverage the funding in the best of ways.
Great. Well, thank you for sharing those thoughts with us. So it doesn't look like Yanti's reappeared yet, but hopefully she'll reappear during our fishbowl conversation and she can share her remarks there. So I think what we'll do is we'll go to the fishbowl conversation. So first of all, thank you to all of our speakers. That was incredible. I think a really huge amount of rich information. We've touched on a lot of topics from community philanthropy to power to ODA, everything almost within the development space. And it starts to show us both complex, but how interwoven I think these critical issues and needs are. And it does start to lay out a pathway for us to follow. We just need to make sure we're undertaking sort of thoughtful, critical analysis and being very honest with ourselves to not just partner for the sake of it, but to really unpack how we partner and what are the issues that are still preventing us from partnering successfully. And I think Power was touched on as a very good example of that. So actually Yanti is back, so we'll go back to Yanti to hear the private sector piece still, and then we'll go to the fishbowl. Good to have you back, Yanti.
Yeah, sorry about that. It's really unavoidable. So I changed my other internet connection here. So I think I was saying about the challenges that is very, very important to mention here is about the fear of dealing with diversity and the cross-sectoral complexity. And the fear of partnering itself can boycott ourselves in terms of working with other sectors. Now, in terms of private sector, I think it is interesting to see that the private sector is born out or naturally is very competitive, and they want to have quick gain on whatever they are trying to do. And this can be a stumbling block when we see them working with other stakeholders, particularly the philanthropic or the civil society organization. Because certainly we in the civil society organizations tend to look at more detailed in terms of process and everything. The private sectors want to gain results in a very quick manner. So this would be something that we need to bridge, you know, and therefore an effective brokering skills need to be acquired by all parties or players to ensure, you know, all the gaps are met. And one last bit of my thought is that during the COVID crisis, particularly here in my country, where our situation is quite bad in ASEAN region, ASEAN member countries, Indonesia as the biggest countries in ASEAN, you know, certainly we suffered a lot. But interestingly, when we talk about partnership, the desire to partners tend to grow because people or sectors realize that they cannot work together, they cannot work alone. So this is like when we go to the dark tunnel, people tend to look where the light is. And it doesn't matter whether there's your competitors or whether they are your enemies, as long as the light is there, that's where everybody is trying to go. So with that, I think we have a good opportunity here to support, you know, those partnerships that never happened before, to look at how everybody's addressing solutions rather than focusing on the problems. So I think that's my last bit, which probably you missed. And again, apologize for the internet connection, poor internet connection.
That's okay. We're just glad to have you back. So thank you, Yanti, and we can touch on those topics more in the fishbowl now. Sure. So we're going to shift to this fishbowl, which we have about 25 minutes for. And again, as I mentioned earlier, the idea is it's a cross-participatory dialogue. So people can make comments, ask questions to the panelists, ask questions of each other. There's already some good chat in the chat room there. And feel free to either, there's a raise your hand button along the bottom of the Zoom, or mention in the chat that you would like to speak, and we will try and do things in an orderly fashion that way. And I do already have one person who has said that they would like to speak, which is Kari Neidfeld-Thomas. So if you could introduce yourself and share your thoughts, that would be great to hear from you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Kari Neidfeld-Thomas. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Sounds great. I am with CECP, Chief Executives for Corporate Purpose. We have been around for over 20 years supporting the corporate sector with their corporate responsibility initiatives. We were founded by Paul Newman and other corporate CEOs, and we work with both CEOs on their corporate purpose strategies, and we additionally are working with the individuals who are leading these strategies inside of their companies. And I would say that a few thoughts that would love to just gather everyone's insights into them, that we similarly to some of the comments that have been made here today, have seen a number of adaptive behaviors in companies. In particular, companies have been more flexible, not just in expanding their cross-sector partnerships, but even with partnering with each other during this time. COVID has brought out this concept that one can actually partner with their competitors. Companies have understood that trust has fallen in government and that there is an opportunity for them to be able to step up and look at a number of different opportunities to work together. We have also been seeing a significant amount of efforts in companies around virtual volunteering. And so I do think it would be great to hear some insights on that, because I do think that some of the SDG initiatives would lend themselves to more of this at this time, especially, I know everyone wants more revenue or wants more directed revenue to be able to come into the civil sector to be able to support initiatives. But at the same time, there is a lot of opportunity for human capital to be able to make a difference and support these initiatives. And then another additional piece that I will just reference is that CECP has developed over the years a number of reports and a metric called total social investment. We put out the S in ESG. We have 2 different publications that we've put out on this topic. I will put it in the chat function for everyone. But in particular, we know that companies are looking at ways that they can look at their entire enterprise and be able to support initiatives. So for example, I would use an example that Medtronic recently open sourced code to lower end ventilators that did not require as much technology to build, because they just wanted society to be able to figure out how to scale up some solutions quickly and not have it have to go through their supply chain or be perceived to have to go through their company's initiatives. So this concept of how good beyond giving can happen and how companies really can be a partner, but it doesn't always necessarily mean additional philanthropic dollars. It could mean that they're doing this by having their staff, their employees be able to do work in new ways. And it could mean that they're using their entire supply chain, intellectual capital, some of their research that they're doing to be able to bring out new solutions. So would love to just throw that out as a topic for discussion.
Great, thank you. Anyone like to pick up that stream of conversation next?
I can go. The corporate sector I'm most familiar with these days is hospitality. And I know, one, how positive hospitality was engaging with the SDGs and with the Paris Accords. But I also know how hard they've been hit economically by COVID. So I know it's a difficult balancing act, but I would greatly support what Carrie said about business will build its greatest contribution to the SDGs through building them into their business models, not through corporate philanthropy, but for really integrating into their business models. And then again, business can bring pace, practicality, and hopefully good consumer interfaces into the SDG world, which would be really useful. So it's an important partner. Thanks.
Hey, Lauren, can I jump in here on this?
Please, this is open for all now.
I could not agree more with Peter. You know, I think our experience at UNDP is the more you are able to integrate, right, the SDGs as part of the core central business model of a company, right, away from both the CSR and the philanthropy side, right, the more impact will happen and the more change throughout the entire aspects of a company, from the supply chain to the consumer interface. It's essential. That's why we as UNDP, you know, have been for years working on something called the business call to action, which is about inclusive and sustainable business models and helping companies do this business model. It's why with OECD, and George is here, we've been, part of the Kampala principles for business. This is why, to some degree, we just launched last week as UNDP a COVID-19 private sector platform with the ICC, International Chamber of Commerce, Global Compact, DHL, Microsoft, and PricewaterhouseCoopers. It's all about that integration. I think we are coming to the moment of the post-CSR era, right? And it's essential. And the question then becomes, how can philanthropy, with its ingenuity, with its flexibility, kind of come around in terms of coalitions to help very large, very impactful corporations to make that transition together with government and civil society? That's a question perhaps on top of everything else that was posing there.
Thanks, Marcos. Is there any panelist or participant that wants to build on that?
May I give my response to that?
Please.
I do agree, Peter and Marcos, about how actually companies now seeing sustainability of their business more or go beyond charity or CSR. In fact, the organization that I'm chairing at the moment, we start seeing that CSR is really far go beyond charity. And therefore, we see the role of private sector more as the development players who run their business responsibly. And in doing their business, of course, they have to be profitable. And because of that, they need to make sure that their operation runs responsibly, giving respect to their stakeholders and preserving the environment. So in this case, we need to also realize, that the understanding and interpretation of CSR in many parts of the world are not necessarily the same. Even within ASEAN region, we see that there are still companies thinking differently about CSR, So we need to do more education to the companies in terms of what is the true meaning of CSR. That really is the era of sustainable development. What's in it for them is actually sustaining their business. So I think this is a good exercise for us all here, to also make sure that all the players in the partnership, whatever the partnerships are, we need to make sure that they catch up what is with the true meaning of the sustainable development agenda. That's all from me.
Great, thank you. That's really nice little conversation on that topic. We might shift to the next person. We have another input from OUBC Babatunde Olucio. Apologies if I pronounced your name incorrectly, but please go ahead.
No, thank you very much. That's fine. So for me, I think within the context of this conversation, it would also be good. I'm not sure whether any of the panelists mentioned this about the culture of mutual suspicion and distrust that exists between civil society, businesses, and government. There's a need for us to find a way of working differently without having to, let's say, affect what we can achieve together. And I think the OGP model, the open government partnership model, provides that platform, especially the way we are seeing this in Nigeria, where government is already committed to that multi-stakeholder process of partnership for this to be done. And this speaks so well to the submission of some of the panelists around that political will for there to be that kind of multi-stakeholder partnership. I just thought I should flag that. Again, within the context of how we've seen an increase in the level of philanthropy given COVID-19. So we've seen businesses mobilizing resources and helping governments to match these resources. We've also seen civil society organizations also doing that, but that is not happening within a multi-stakeholder approach. So thinking through the OGP model might also help for us to be able to explore how can we build that better using that kind of model, and also ensuring that we go back to, we don't go back to the old normal. We're able to use experience of the old normal to build the new normal. Over to you.
Okay, thank you. Yes, good reminder. Anyone like to respond, participant or panelist? Okay, well, thank you for that input then, really helpful. So next I'm going to call on James Mcgowan from the European Community Foundation Initiative.
Hi, Lauren, and everybody on the panel and participants. Thanks very much for the opportunity to participate in this. I think it's a really, really important meeting. I just want to sort of throw out something in the fishbowl as such. There was a call from Ulrich, I think, to where possible for those involved in philanthropy to try and encourage and support ODA and the importance of ODA and so on. I'm sure there are some in positions that are able to do that. I'm coming very much from a community foundation perspective, local philanthropy, very, very local in some cases. And I equally would sort of throw out a call to others who can influence in a different way. Local philanthropy is very, very much influenced by context and particularly the operating environment. And in some countries that is being compromised by, the phenomenon of closing space for civil society. So in order for particularly community philanthropy to become a viable and useful multi-sector partner in relation to achieving the SDGs, the operating environment itself in many cases needs to be improved. And there are others, whether it be through OECD or UN and UNDP, who can potentially influence governments to help improve the operating environment for philanthropy that will then start a virtuous circle of engagement. And secondly, sort of aligned to that, I think, is the recognition of the importance of supporting the philanthropy infrastructure, particularly where it's very, very local. The small scale institutions, community foundations, and so on, cannot be effective without a supporting infrastructure. And that's often the unseen added value, the glue that connects that philanthropy together. And I would encourage others who are interested in multi-stakeholder engagement to think about those aspects to really release the potential of philanthropy at local level. Thank you.
Thanks, James. Peter, would you like to share some thoughts?
Just briefly, thanks, James. I think that was really useful. And for those of you listening who are involved in community philanthropy in the global north, if you like, and may not usually see your role as global, I think you have a tremendous role to play because you are the best distributed network in philanthropy and you have extremely good community relationships. So I think those can be called on in this ODA support and indeed just connecting people. But second, James, your question about space for philanthropy and indeed for civil society in many countries that are tackling the SDGs is an important one. And I think that obviously the UN and bilaterals have a big role in this. Often it's a question of boundaries. And the more we think through multi-stakeholder partnerships well and what the complementary contributions are and frame it in that way, I think the better partnerships that can be established. That may not always work. There may be other politics in play, but I think good ideas about what the contribution of each player is are really important to creating space. Thanks.
If I can just add on that, Lauren, I do believe that this is important, of course, but also part of the work that we are and the dialogue we're having with governments as the UN since the very beginning. And before that as well, because space has been shrinking the past year with autocratization also across the world, not only in the global south, but actually really across the world. And I do believe that there are more possibilities than we actually believe to come forward, as Peter said, and show that this is really a constructive and a very much needed way to work. So we're happy to provide the platforms also as part of this partnership, also at country level, to share with you what we have been doing so far, but also to strategize together.
Great, thank you. I think that would be really helpful. That's definitely an issue that philanthropy has been grappling with for a long time, and who is there to strengthen and support that system and the advocacy around it. So thank you. We've got lots of people interested in speaking, so this is good. So next I'm going to call on Ollie Henman, if Ollie is there.
Yes, hi. Thank you so much, Lauren. Great to join this call. It's extremely valuable to hear all of the contributions. I was just going to highlight one or two things I mentioned in the chat as well. So I coordinate Action for Sustainable Development, which brings together over 3,000 different community groups working on sustainability around the world. And each year we've been supporting different coalitions to do these parallel reports, which Nana also highlighted, by civil society alongside the VNRs. And I think it's interesting to see some of the trends there that unfortunately, you know, the goals linked to economic success really are under threat this year. Goal 1 around poverty, Goal 8 around decent work and economic growth, and Goal 10 on inequalities in particular looking very challenging in the current environment. So I guess my point was, and I think it sort of harks back to some of the earlier conversations, is how can philanthropy help to plug some of those gaps? I'm not saying everything, but how can philanthropy be more targeted to actually reach those smaller community groups that are doing the work on the ground? Because a lot of the feedback we have at the moment is that it tends to be larger grant programs which make it harder for small groups to access funds. And still, I mean, Civicus and others have highlighted how the vast majority of funds go to larger kind of household name NGOs, INGOs, and we really feel that there's an opportunity here and a need to really rethink the way that funds are distributed. It'd be interesting to hear from some of the philanthropists, you know, how they think they might be able to do that to kind of make it a bit more, you know, lower the barrier for entry for smaller groups to be able to access even relatively small grants of a few $1,000s can go a very long way. So that was really my question. Thanks.
That's a great question, Ollie. And I'm going to put Oksana and Nana on the spot here and see if they'd like to respond first, because they might have some good thoughts or reactions to this. And if not, they can defer to anyone else.
May I start? It's really a big question, how we reach out smaller groups or smaller NGOs, especially in remote areas. Doesn't matter where exactly this remote area is, and how to identify those practices that usually unseen on a larger national level or even regional level. And I think in order to really make those practices visible and to provide necessary support, it's necessary to combine different instruments when we talk about philanthropy. Even when we talk about grant making, it could be a combination of traditional grant making of most grant makers do with open call, with open entry, I would say, when people can identify. But in order to run open calls and really reach out those groups, then you need to create a trust that you can get this money. Otherwise, it doesn't work. But once you have a trusted relationship with your potential beneficiaries, this instrument works. So you can identify areas, you can identify projects and groups beyond your immediate network, I would say. It's high risk because you don't know them, and that's why philanthropy is about risk, but it's high benefit because again, you increase your support beyond the networks. And maybe we need to think that the way between where the money are sitting, like philanthropic money are sitting to the end beneficiary should be shorter, with in a way less intermediaries. And to do that, I think we as a grant makers need to change our own thinking from project funding to institutional funding, for funding networks and associations and infrastructure. Because without those elements, you can't really support smaller groups. You need an infrastructure in place.
Yes, good reminder of the infrastructure piece. And for all of us, Nana, did you want to add to that?
Yes, thank you. I definitely agree with Oksana on her points. And I do think that if we want to fund smaller organizations, we have to also take another look at our measures of success and the benchmarks that we set. And if we are looking at, for example, even the proposals, what kind of demands are we making? And so we have to look at what would suit organizations. It's important to look at what the principles are. Of course, transparency, accountability, you want to make sure that the money, value for money and all of that. But then we have to really have a conversation with these partners to look at what it is, because if you are sending out the same template that you are giving to big organizations, to smaller organizations, of course, they would not meet the mark. So that is important. And we have to take another look at our log frames and all of those things. We have to take another look at all of that. And then, of course, the resources that we are giving, it's not always money. And I think Oksana has made that point earlier. And so in giving out the resources that organizations need, particularly smaller organizations, it may be something else apart from money. And how do we get that and help enable them to have access to that? I think one of the things, we've talked about local philanthropy a lot, and I do think that if we really build the infrastructure and we build our local philanthropic, the local philanthropy, we would be able to get more resources going to local organizations. So I think that is definitely another aspect. One that Oksana has already talked about, and I just want to reiterate, is the strengthening institutions. And so if you already have institutions that are doing good work, how are we investing in the strength and resilience of those institutions so that they can continue to do good work? And not only just giving them funding, and that is letting them live from hand to mouth. So longer term partnerships that invest into building stronger institutions and making them more resilient. And so I think these are some of the things that would support local organizations.
Okay, I think, go ahead.
Just one phrase. I totally agree with what Nana and Oksana have said about support local and greater localization and grant making, and allowing for different levels of organizational development. At the same time, I think we all have to ask local civil society to grow, to stretch itself, to step up to the challenges that we have. We've got 10 years on the Paris Accords, and local philanthropy is part of that. So yes, there needs to be a growth curve, but also all of us need to be thinking about our own organizations and how do we need to grow in order to meet these challenges. And I think philanthropy is well placed to help organizations grow, but it's not just we need a hand, in a sense, we need to get in the trenches together. Thanks.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Peter, and maybe a good way to close out this part of the session is we need to be in the trenches together, and whether that's through some very hard roundtable conversations, starting to nut out the issues, opportunities, and what we really need to fix, change, and what's really working. Perhaps that's something that we could all think about collectively, because we have a great brains trust here of dedicated people that are working at all levels with their sleeves rolled up. So with that, we still had a few more questions. I know Radhika Shah had one and Yang Eng. We actually need to keep moving along, but I'd encourage all participants to please share questions that you haven't yet in the chat, and then we can take those away and keep working through these questions, sharing them as a collective, start to work through some answers on them and whatnot, and Wings can certainly help us do that. So please share those questions there. Thank you for a really good conversation. I think, you know, we're trying these new approaches, so the fishbowl is sort of getting there. And certainly if we had more time, we could probably make it even more participatory, but thank you to all that contributed. So with that, I'd like to hand over to Angel Font of the La Caixa Foundation in Spain to share some reflections from our conversation today and some insight from La Caixa's own experiences. So Angel is the Corporate Director of Research and Strategy at La Caixa, which is the largest European foundation. And as I mentioned earlier, he was recently elected as the new chair of the European Foundation Center. So with that, Angel, please take us away.
Thank you. Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, all of you. Good morning for those who are based there in the Americas. Good evening for those who came from Asia or the East, and good afternoon for the, like me, who are based in Africa or in Europe. I'm based in Barcelona, and I have to say to you that I'm very happy to assist to that discussion. I've been working for the philanthropic sector for the last 30 years, and I'm really very happy to hear what I hear today, because I have to realize, and I have to share with you that just 10 years ago, or maybe 15 years ago, this role for philanthropic organization was not so clear. So I'm very happy because something has been done properly to arrive today to that discussion. So for me, philanthropy is a very simple idea that I'd like to share with you. It's a strong, powerful, but simple idea that when some people use some private resources, some assets, normally it's money, but could be a building, could be knowledge, maybe in the future will be data, who knows? We use private resources for the common good. This is for me what resumes what philanthropy is. And that brings to us probably the best of these two worlds that we were talking today, that is the public sector and the private one. In fact, when we spoke in the past about these partnerships, we normally use the 3 Ps model, no? Private, public, partnership. Sometimes within our colleagues, we joke trying to use another extra P for that kind of partnership that will be private, public, philanthropic partnerships, 4 Ps. Because probably in my vision, and I completely agree with the thoughts that you mentioned today, philanthropy is the best place to become public and public interest, because probably is the way, the place, the safest, and also the best place to work together with these 2 kinds of interest. So this 4P model will be the base of this multi-stakeholder partnership model that you represent. I can say to you as an actor at La Caixa Foundation, but also as you was mentioned, also representing now the European Foundation Center in the last weeks, in the last month, I was appointed as the chair of that organization. But thinking in our experience, for instance, the lessons that we, the European Foundations, we had taken from this COVID-19 response, I have to say to you that all of the European foundations, and I think that's applied to other foundations all over the world, we consider ourselves not as emergency organizations. Otherwise, during this pandemic, all philanthropic sector has acted very quickly, and the response has been huge, probably the most important response to an only unique event. So we have discovered also that we can work in a different way, because it was set in our mind that we are not built as an emergency organizations, and we have act really huge, not isolated, and in a very quick way. And probably, and it was signed by all the European foundations also. Also, we have done trying to listen for partners, trying to listen from experts. Probably the situation of the COVID-19 crisis has allowed, because every single organization know nothing about the situation. It was an obligation to hear from partners. And I think it's hear from experts, as Peter mentioned, experts as the civil society representatives. So I think that kind of lessons also came up from that perspective. And of course, even to give you another example, at La Caixa Foundation level, we also have a very important program for job placement that has worked in Spain for the last 10 years, that is Incorpora. And we try to mix in the same program businesses to create new jobs and public agencies who promote to promote training and job placement for jobless people. That kind of programs are working so well when all the members, private one, businesses, the public agencies, and the philanthropic institutions who have common goals, and we work, as you mentioned, with transparency and accountability. Just a last word, just to say that European philanthropy also would like to have a place in the world. I know when Ulrich also mentioned the response of foundations, we normally use the name of US philanthropic institutions. It's the more renowned. For us, we feel them very close because the North American philanthropy institutions helped to build 3 decades ago our organization. So we are very close to that idea. But we would like also that in the coming future, also European institutions can be seen, not just a regional agents, but a global, as all of you has mentioned. For that reason, I think European philanthropy, the European Philanthropy or European Foundation Center also is working both, trying to have peer learning between members, and on the other side, having to have a greater voice to the world, to the European institutions, and to the rest of the members of this community. So I'm very happy just to realize how philanthropy sector is seen for all the actors, and we would like to work for a more balanced relationship between the different sectors, the corporate, as you mentioned, the governmental, and of course the philanthropy. This is my regards, the thoughts that I have after your discussion that I appreciate so much. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Angel. I think that's all very insightful, and particularly the 4 Ps. Let's all start to use the 4 Ps instead of the 3 Ps. That's a great evolution. So with that, I'm going to hand back to Benjamin and subsequently Marcos. So Benjamin, please close us out here.
Well, thank you so much, Lauren. And that was just such an incredibly insightful exchange. And I'm really thankful to all of the participants. And we'll have actual wrapping and closing words by Marcos Neto. And just before I give him the floor, I wanted to highlight one point, which I think surfaced quite naturally from almost all the interventions, either explicitly or implicitly, directly or not, but it's the critical importance of a strong ecosystem that supports philanthropy, especially when it comes to local philanthropy in emerging economies, in developing countries, and so on. Because philanthropy is a human instinct. It has been there. It has not been invented by anyone. But the way it's developing, it's organizing, takes a process, and that process can be accelerated. It can be hindered. And we know that there's a huge potential to grow these philanthropic resources, not just from high net worth individuals, corporations, but also from the middle class, from grassroots. And that's where actually the biggest potential is. And so we really want all of us to keep this in mind as we think about how can we have more local resources for long-term sustainable development and for strong local civil societies. Is really investing in this infrastructure. And that point was made both at the sort of organizational level and how do we invest in capacities of organizations, and at the same time at the more sectoral level of the sector itself. And so I wanted to highlight that because it's both a response to the policy issues we've mentioned, the shrinking space for civil society. If there is no voice, if there is no collective body that can speak on behalf of civil society on the one hand, philanthropy on the other hand, and engage in dialogue with governments, it's almost impossible to influence that trend. And that should be a major concern of our sector. And likewise, if we want local philanthropy to grow and all these institutions that James and others have been highlighting, you also need to build that infrastructure that can help make that happen. So at Wings, we're developing actually a tool and we'll launch it soon. So I just wanted to highlight that a little bit so that you're aware that in the coming weeks, we'll be launching something we call the philanthropy ecosystem mapping methodology. And the idea is not so much research oriented, but more how do you engage actors, stakeholders, governments, existing networks and support organizations for philanthropy, champions in the philanthropic sector locally especially, but also of course those who are interested in the issue that work internationally. How do you bring everyone around the same table and think about that topic? How can we strengthen our philanthropic sector? Where is the potential in terms of individual giving, of corporations, and what should be our priorities? Should we focus on advocacy because we have a big problem on that end and we need to put a lot of efforts there, or should we focus on building this local infrastructure for community philanthropy and so on? So, but the most important is how do we engage actors around that, especially local foundations and local philanthropic actors that can lead the movement and lead to a stronger infrastructure for their field to thrive on the long term. So just stay tuned on the Wings communications. We'll be really happy to engage in discussions with you to see how to leverage these kind of tools really engage different stakeholders in strengthening the philanthropic sector and strengthening it also including, of course, in terms of enabling it to become a platform for multi-actor collaboration and increasing its impact by doing so. So that was the only quick comment I wanted to make based on all the great inputs. And with this, I'll just hand it over to Marcos Neto, the director of the finance sector at the UNDP to wrap up the discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Oksana, Yanti, Angel, Peter, Nana, and all the others that spoke today. I think this has been a very good and enlightening conversation. In 2014, when we at UNDP partnered with, the Hilton Foundation, Lauren at the time, the whatever it was called, what she was doing, and Ford Foundation, others, to create the SDG Philanthropy Platform. We had, we had a conviction that philanthropy needed to have a voice in the processes of what at that time was called the post-2015 agenda, and which is now the Sustainable Development Goals, the Agenda 2030. It had to have a voice in the construction of that process. And after that was done, the philanthropy had an obligation, responsibility to partner, to come along, right, with all the stakeholders to put this together. So in that sense, I'm delighted to the 4 actions, recommendations that the study that Peter mentioned and that the Hilton Foundation has put together, because I think we've learned through the last few years of the SDG Philanthropy Platform similar messages, and hopefully contributed to the learning of the Hilton Foundation in that process as well. I think it is time indeed for philanthropy for all of us to recognize the power of civil society communities, and give communities great ownership to radically expand networks. We knew then and you knew now that sometimes we talk among the converted. We actually need to make it into a much larger movement. The coming together to maximize every dollar between philanthropy, government, and private sector is going to become ever more essential, right? And I think in conversation of this ecosystem, which is so important, it is also important to provide this shift from transparency to accountability. You cannot have accountability without transparency, but transparency is more than accountability. I think it is really important that philanthropy offers that accountability as part of this ecosystem conversation going forward. Now, I also heard that is not easy. I think Nana and Yanti and everybody mentioned it is not easy to partner. It is not easy to partner within philanthropy, to partner between, philanthropy and the UNDP, or, and even further difficult to partner in a multi-stakeholder process with philanthropy, NGOs, governments and business, right? But as the old say goes, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together, right? And we have no choice but to go far and fast. Because as Peter said, we have 10 years for the SDGs, we have 10 years for the Paris Accord, and there is no choice. The challenges that we faced before COVID were already humongous, and the challenges that we face now with COVID are simply impossible from any single stakeholder to address it alone. And it's almost impossible for us to address it in the same ways that we've been partnering, right? We have to partner and we have to come along together, and we have to throw, to some degree, the ways we've dealt with each other away and rebuild it while we are doing things at the same time. I'm optimistic. I think we have never, as humanity, at least in 100 years, all felt the same thing at the same time everywhere in the world. That provides a sense of belonging, that gives us a notion that if I am locked down in my house in New York City, and if you are in LA, and if you are in Indonesia, and in Ghana, and in India, it is the same reason and it's the same feeling. How do we maximize that moment, right, to come together, right, towards the SDGs, towards the Paris Accord? It's not like we have to reinvent it. The vision for what we want to do together, that vision has been given to us, right? We were part of constructing that vision. Tomorrow, for the last 6 months, I've been engaged in a process that has a big moment tomorrow, when heads of states for about 75 countries are going to come together to talk about the issues of financing the recovery to COVID and beyond, right? Philanthropy is a stakeholder on financing, not only because you've got money, but we've got ideas, that you've got lessons, that you've got learning, right? So we are presenting to the heads of states a menu of policies that has been constructed by 6 discussion groups that have involved hundreds of member states, civil society, philanthropy, and we hope to get the heads of states tomorrow to provide us with some notion of guidance on all this menu of policies. And we, as the United Nations Development Program, and through our SDG Philanthropy Platform, in partnership with Wings, we will bring back the results of the meeting to you, right? We will come to you and say, here's what the government's policies going forward will look like. Join us. We are also, as the UNDP, the technical leader on all the socioeconomic recovery assessments and plans that are now more than 120 assessments and 82 recovery plans for COVID-19. We are going to use the SDG Philanthropy Platform in the same way it was created in 2014. To give you a voice on those recovery plans, to give you a space to join on the implementation of those recovery plans to COVID-19. Those are all in our website. You can read all the assessments, you can see all the plans, And we are helpful and hopeful that we can connect to your work on the ground, right, through our infrastructure in our offices to that conversation. It is also an important moment and opportunity to tell governments, you want philanthropy to help you here? Please come on and open the ecosystem for philanthropy. Let the ecosystem for philanthropy come on board, right? So philanthropy can fully act as an equal partner in the recovery phase and the SDG going forward. So I kind of stop here with another say, that one by Winston Churchill. You know, unfortunately today, you know, according to the numbers that we have in the United States, the world will hit 100 million people dying of COVID-19, right? Winston Churchill said that one can never let a crisis go to waste. We owe to these 1 million people and the much more whose livelihoods have been upheaval by this pandemic, right, to come together, to do whatever we can, in whatever new ways we can, right, to come out of this in a much better way than we were before. COVID has highlighted the problems of humanity, being environment, being inequality. It is upon us to solve those problems, right? The SDG Philanthropy Platform, in partnership with WINGS and UNDP, thank you, your attention, your participation, and we are here to make this happen. Count on us. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good day, evening, afternoon, whatever you are.
Great, thank you so much, Marcos. So that concludes our session for this morning, this evening, wherever you're based. So thank you to Marcos and to all of our speakers for the wonderful insight. I think there is a lot for us to all go away, think about, digest, reflect on, and then act upon, both as individuals and collectively. As Marcos and Benjamin have said, certainly get involved with the SDG Philanthropy Platform. Also keep an eye on what the Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation is doing, which is led by UNDP and the OECD with WINGS support. And let's all, as Marcos said, maximize this moment, be thoughtful, strategic, and work collectively together to achieve a safe, healthy, and just society for all, and build back better. And we'll stay in touch and look forward to connecting with you again soon. Thank you, everybody.